He's a self-described himbo whose foes include prominent manosphere characters like Andrew Tate. He's drawn the ire of political figures across the spectrum, from Andrew Cuomo to Ted Cruz. He positions himself as something of a counterweight to the right-wing pipeline that's been attracting young men en masse in this country.
The digital bro world's new rising star.
His name is Hasan.
At least the nickname fits. Piker.
Hasan Piker.
Speaking of whiners,
Ben Shapiro lives in a world of garbage.
spoiled brats,
And doo-doo.
Hasan Piker, like #1 on the list.
Hasan Piker,
I'm saying it.
who said America deserved
9/11, dude.
said in his response,
The New York Times calls the viral streamer, quote, made for the manosphere.
Every dude is a 7. How are we going to sit here and be like, Ben Shapiro is significantly more masculine than hasanabi, dude? A lot of people ultimately look at this stuff and say, it's because the left is so intolerant towards men or whatever. I'm not. I'm a man. Toxic masculinity. It is a bastardized version of masculinity. Competence. Why is competence a masculine feature? We got to figure out a way to like reach young men. They're angry and resentful.
He's here with us today to discuss how liberals can bring this demographic back into the fold.
This country was stone cold dead.
Good day from Newsweek headquarters at the top of the World Trade Center in New York City. I am Carlo Versano, and this is the 1600, the YouTube edition at least. Today we are talking men, Du Bois. I have one here with me. His name is Hasan Piker. But before we get to Hasan, so I declared this week, somewhat controversially in our newsletter, to be Man Week. Man Week at the 1600. We've been doing a lot of deep dives in the newsletter just about the sort of state of the young American male, why they seem so adrift, both in their lives and politically, how MAGA, how the right wing, how the far right has been so successful in cultivating these young men and cultivating Gen Z, the majority of whom, of course, voted for Trump last November. So my guest today, as I said, is Hasan Piker. Now, if you don't know who Hasan is, ask your kids. If they don't know, ask your grandkids. Hasan's a very popular Twitch streamer. We'll get to what that is in a minute. He's a self-proclaimed Marxist and anti-imperialist. He's been called the Rush Limbaugh for Zoomers. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but I like it. As well as the left's answer to Joe Rogan. So Hasan, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I call myself the Rush Limbaugh for Zoomers, but without the brainworms, both literally and figuratively. So that's... No, I like it to the boomers.
Well, I was just going to say, so we have a lot of boomers in our audience. We love the boomers here at the 1600.
Me too.
So, yeah, so let's first, what is a Twitch streamer? What do you do all day?
A Twitch streamer basically just goes on this live streaming platform, Twitch, and live broadcast. Primarily, it used to be a video game platform where people would just like play video games and others would watch them. And over the years, it's evolved, and now there's a lot of non-video game-related content on there as well. There's a concept called IRL streaming, in real life streaming, where people just go outside and will hang out with their friends, and it's like a simulated friendship, basically, for the Zoomers and the Generation Alpha that just don't have time to go outside or have no third spaces to go to that are like safe, where they can socialize themselves. And it's somewhat unhealthy, I will admit, but I have taken up this medium because it's a very personal one, where there's constant feedback with your audience. I've taken to this medium to do political commentary over the course of an 8-hour broadcast, which is what I do every single day from 11 a.m. Pacific time all the way to 7 p.m. Pacific time.
You are live for 8 hours a day.
Yeah. And it used to be longer than that. I've actually cut back a little bit. I do like 7 hours now, which my audience jokingly refers to as half-day Hossie, where they'll say I'm doing a half-day.
Yeah,
I'm quiet
you're
quitting.
slacking.
I'm quiet quitting my own job. But yeah, that's basically what it is. It's like YouTube, but only live, if that makes sense. And yeah, that's my platform.
So let's get right into this with men, as we have been talking about, right? So men, here's the sort of the big statistic from last November. Young men increased GOP support from 35% to 48% between 2016 and 2023 per Gallup. So that's actually before taking into account the election in November. Now, in November, they broke for Trump after supporting Biden in 2020. Men under 45 went for Trump, 52 to 44 for Harris. That's a 16-point swing from 2020 when that group voted for the Democrat Biden by 8 points. What has the right done to get so successful at capturing the attention of young men in America?
it's partially what the right has done, but it's also partially what the left has failed to do. I think both play a pretty significant role here. As far as what the right has done, they've been able to identify certain hobby pipelines, I would say, where there are people who are like right-wing adjacent, or have some social conservative values, and they've created this incredible network that cross-pollinates all the way from a Dungeons and Dragons, a hobbyist YouTube account down to the Ben Shapiro's of the world, and then all the way into like Turning Point USA and campus organizing for the Republican turnout machine. TikTok plays a role in this as well. So there's a bunch of different pipelines on the internet where you might find yourself, or at least like a lot of young men report on this after the fact, find themselves in the throes of right-wing commentary and right-wing values, right-wing culture war issues that they advocate for without really recognizing that they themselves are actually in the right wing. And it happens, it doesn't happen overnight, it happens over time. The reason why this
they're meeting guys where they are. They're meeting guys where they are as opposed to trying to get them to meet.
But I want to make this very clear. Even all the way to like Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan, until recently, I would not consider to be like a right-wing operative. Joe Rogan has right-wing values, and he evolved and he leaned into those right-wing values over the years. But he was never like an overt right-wing operative or an overt, Republican voter until like, I would say the last 2 years, maybe. I think COVID and his like move to Austin, Texas probably played a pretty formative role. But even after that, if you recall, he endorsed Bernie Sanders, right, in like 2020. For me, a lot of people say, oh, it's because he endorsed Donald Trump that he's like a right-winger. No, for me, it was DeSantis. When he said Ron DeSantis, which was far before Donald Trump, when he said Ron DeSantis is his favorite governor or his favorite politician, I was like, oh, that man has lost his mind. He is 100% full-blown right-wing because like Ron DeSantis is so uncharismatic. Like even if you're an apolitical thing. Yeah, right. Even if you're like an apolitical guy, I get why you could be lured into the enigma that is Donald Trump, right? He's like, he tells it like it is. He has a lot of bravado, all this stuff. But Ron DeSantis does not have any of that. And for someone to say they like Ron DeSantis, that means they are super invested in like the right-wing project. But it's still important. His evolution is still important because he didn't start off that way. And a lot of people still to this day would not even consider Joe Rogan to be a right-winger. They would consider him to be just like
He's
honest
an MMA
guy.
Yeah.
Right.
He was an MMA guy. He was the host of Fear Factor when I was growing up, right?
Yeah.
Having
An
people
honest,
eating
regular
bugs.
guy who happens to really think that the Republicans have common sense positions. And that is way more devastating, I think. That's way more successful in terms of like building a turnout machine than someone whose career is actually in tatters right now, like Ben Shapiro and the entire Daily Wire franchise, because those guys are open political operatives and everybody knows it.
Right. We'll get to them and the Charlie Kirk thing in a minute, but I want to go back to something you said, because to me, the biggest question in politics right now is what happens when Trump is gone, right? The guy is not going to be president forever, even if he wants to be. He's not going to live forever. There are no Republicans, to your point about DeSantis, who come even close to replicating the Trump, whatever the Trump aura is, right? His personal charisma. He is truly one of one.
No,
J.D. Vance.
There's one beyond.
There is one. Oh, okay. Well, I'm curious to hear who you are, who you think that is, because I don't think it's J.D. Vance.
No, absolutely not. It's not J.D. Vance. Do you know who it is?
So who is it?
Tucker Carlson.
Fair. Okay.
This is what everyone always forgets. Everyone always forgets until I go, Tucker Carlson, they go, oh, you're right. I think he is one of the most dangerous right-wing political operatives in the country right now. Dangerous.
Well, he's got the juice.
He has the motion. He also is not dissimilar to early Trump. A very good room reader and unafraid to take positions that are heterodox as opposed to the rest of the party, especially in moments that matter, especially in moments where he can come across as earnest and a different kind of Republican. And Donald Trump did that as well. He did that with like corporate lobbying, for example, in 2016, where he was like, I've paid for every single person here. I'm a billionaire. Therefore, I'm impenetrable. I'm honest. I'm earnest. Tucker Carlson does that with Israel. He does that with like left populism, fake left populism when it comes to like workers' rights and things of that nature. And I think that's very dangerous, especially because the Democrat messaging machine and the Democrat brand overall is so horrible. It's so out of touch, elitist, smug, hyper focused on identity politics, but only as a mechanism, like as a cynical mechanism to push back against their opponents, whether it's valid when you're doing that to the right wingers or even silly when you're doing that to your left flank that happen to be more progressive than you. And I think a lot of people are frustrated with that. They're done with that.
So Tucker also has one thing in common with Trump, is which he's a TV guy, right? He understands the medium, whether it's television or video streaming, whatever. Do you think he'd run? I agree with you that I think he'd probably win a general election.
I think we'll see where it goes. But I think if he ran, he's the only one who I personally think could carry the Trump torch. The scariest part about it is that the difference between Trump and Tucker Carlson is that I think Tucker Carlson is more a servant of a fascist ideology than Donald Trump is. I think Donald Trump is too narcissistic to care about like building a comprehensive white supremacist movement. And I think
that's always been my take too.
Yeah, he's too disorganized. He's too self-invested. He's too into like doing petty corruption and being beloved by liberal institutions. As a matter of fact, I think there's a lot of resentment there. Like he was never accepted into the New York elite, and therefore he has always carried that resentment. And he's been able to channel that resentment into like broader anger that like right wingers feel in West Virginia. But for Donald Trump, it's because Graydon Carter didn't invite him to like variety parties or whatever. But for the West Virginian former coal miner, he has that anger because he thinks like the Democratic elite have destroyed the industry, and it's not actually his bosses that have fired him and made way for automation.
As though Donald Trump gives a crap about the coal industry or anything going on in West Virginia or Kentucky to begin with.
Well, I think he cares about the coal industry in the sense that like he cares about, rich friends that own coal mines and whatnot, but he doesn't care about the coal miners or labor in any capacity. And neither do the Democrats, unfortunately. By and large, they don't either. And there are some who do.
It was Biden who's told the coal miners, you guys should go learn to code, right? Now, if they actually took that advice, they'd be out of a job. I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was actually Hillary Clinton. I don't know if it was Biden who said that. But yeah, retraining programs, there's a lot of back and forth on retraining. And I think it's a very silly conversation. You're not wrong, though. Ironically enough, if they had learned the code, they'd be door dashing right now.
Right, exactly.
But that's neither here nor there. I think what people want is good paying jobs. And the government already subsidizes for good paying jobs. They just do it in the fracking side of things. They do it in the oil and gas industry side of things, even though a major growth sector for energy for the past decade has been renewable energies, ironically enough, which Biden tried to move in the direction of, and unfortunately was too little too late. And it was crippled by a bunch of people who were sometimes directly affiliated with coal miners, ironically enough, like Joe Manchin, right? Like they harmed that broad agenda. The wide sweeping initiatives that were necessary to make changes and fast, right? And restructure our industrial output to focus on renewable energies. Because I like to always point to Western Pennsylvania. Those guys don't have a genetic predisposition to fracking. They're not. This is a relatively new industry. But they love fracking, or at least like the ones that work in that sector identify with it and they defend it. Why do they identify with it? Why would they defend it? Even though it's like horrible for the environment, because they get $100,000 jobs as a starting salary. And they got trained after a period of not having any jobs whatsoever. They got trained to work in the fracking sector. So it's not necessarily that retraining is a failure. Retraining is a failure if you don't have jobs that are readily available, or retraining is a failure if the jobs that are readily available are about to be outsourced or about to be displaced by automation. Training is a success as long as it gives you a comfortable, reliable, long-term job, potentially with a pension plan, if that even exists any longer.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it does. But I think back to you make a very good point, because one of the things that I've been saying in the newsletter is the automation of entry-level work, both white-collar and also, blue-collar to a degree, I think that that's sort of like an underrated current in all of this. Like we have destroyed, going back to our young people, our young men, we have destroyed the social contract for these people, right? You can't afford a house.
Absolutely.
You want to go to college. You can go to college if you can get in, and then you have to be in debt for the rest of your life. In the off chance you can actually get a job after your worthless degree, you're now competing with AI as well as your peers. I mean, these kids should be inheriting a golden age. Say what you will about this country, right? We are the richest country in the world. We're probably the most resilient economy in the world. In fact, I think we absolutely are. There's still more opportunity here than there is anywhere else. If you don't believe that you can succeed under those circumstances, I understand this siren song of this nihilism and, the shit posting and this sort of like irony poisoned way that people talk online. Like, I can see why that would become attractive.
Yeah. It's nihilism that a lot of young people feel, specifically young men also feel, that cause them to be at the mercy of right-wing charlatans. But I do think it's a lot of coddling. I think this is an unaddressed aspect of this. And I will say this, like, I think people want to feel safe and secure. And a lot of these right-wing commentary spaces, the manosphere, coddles young men. It tells young men, you were destined for greatness and you're not getting what you were entitled. But instead of doing the systemic analysis that you just contributed to, where you said it's because of the systems that we exist under, it's because of capitalism. Instead of saying that, which is the truth, they turn around and say, it's because of woke, it's because of feminism, it's because of women. And they tie it back to something so deeply personal. Because, I mean, we were both young men at a certain point. And I'm sure you have had this experience as well, where you really have these powerful emotions within you and your hormones are exploding. And you have this rush and you see this cute girl that you want to talk to, or you finally muster up the courage and you talk to this cute girl in your class, and then you fuck it up, you fail, right? And then you see her with like some douchebag or something, or a person that you think is a douchebag, right? And then
it's the worst. It's like the worst feeling in the world as a young guy.
The worst feeling in the world, and you let that resentment fester inside of you, and then you go online and you look for a safe space, and there's a safe space right there who says, yeah, that woman is wrong for not recognizing what you are entitled to. You are entitled to her, and she didn't recognize you because she's wrong and she's stupid, and that's why you should carry that resentment. It's not your fault at all. It's not anything that you did. It's nothing that you can learn from, and it's actually because of feminism. It's actually because of woke. This wokeness has made women too entitled. And then you start your journey on this like deeply personal level. You start your journey on the right-wing orbit, and that's just one instance, right? There are so many different areas of interest that right-wingers have for years been able to create pipelines on. Gaming is another one. Oftentimes it still revolves around gender. It's like women are encroaching on our space, on our culture. We were nerds. We were considered nerds. We were bullied. And now women want to be a part of the gaming side of things. And how dare they? And their wokeness and feminism is actually ruining games. Ironically enough, it's still mergers and acquisitions, mass layoffs, and loot boxes, and an endless need for these massive gaming publishers that are now become like $1 trillion industry, more successful than Hollywood, mind you, that are constantly farming and constantly trying to generate more value, that has made games worse overall over the years. But in the same vein as like the lack of opportunity and hope, in the gaming sphere, a lot of the commentary side focuses on wokeness. They say it's like gay people that are developers. They say it's like transness in the developer side that is like made video games woke and therefore made video games worse. So it's always the same dynamic. Cultural
when in doubt, right? Sure, of course. Did you read this piece? It was going viral for the last couple of days. It was in Compact Magazine. I don't really know what that is, but it was by this woman named Helen Andrews, and the essay was called "The Great Feminization." She basically is making this argument, kind of what you were just talking about, that like as women enter the workforce, the white collar workforce, and now overtake men in the white collar workforce, the the labor pool has been, overly feminized, right? You have HR departments that didn't even exist 50 years ago. And if you're a man in a workplace now, even if you're a woman, the HR department is actually the thing that sort of, impacts your day-to-day life more than anything else. It's a very provocative piece. I didn't really agree with it, but I thought it reminded me of Jordan Peterson, because his whole thesis, and he's one of these right-wing manosphere guys. He was sort of like one of the originals, I think.
Yeah. No, he
but
definitely was.
Right. And his whole thing was like, boys are being reared by these institutions, starting in pre-K, going through college, that are, majority female. They're telling them that their ambition is pathological, that competition is bad, that they're supposed to sit still in class when, their body and their hormones are telling them to go crazy, and that everything that they are biologically wired for is now somehow problematic in society. I mean, I don't really agree with this stuff, but it resonates. I see where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think the reason why this is so alluring, this is so great for young men is, like I said, it's coddling people. It's causing them not to look within, to engage in the act of self-criticism, and to go on a lifelong journey of self-improvement, which I think is a much healthier way to go about it. As someone who has also had these sorts of experiences and these sorts of feelings and experienced this chaos directly as a young man, I chose a different path. And I think that is part of the reason why a lot of young men find themselves in this right-wing sphere. And some do snap out of it eventually. I think age and life experience certainly changes that. But in the absence of a sense of community, as more of our social function is happening on the internet, as opposed to in the real world, where interpersonal communication is very different than it is online under the guise of anonymity, I think people lean into more and more antisocial tendencies overall, which causes them to behave in the ways that they do, sometimes even in the real world.
Well, I think, I mean, I thought the point that you were making about dating was resonant with me, because I remember being in that exact position, right? And being, a teenage boy and being into girls and trying to figure out how the heck to make them interested in me. And, that sense of rejection, it has to follow some male in your life, whether it's a teacher or an older brother or whatever, who's saying to you, listen, it's okay, man. She's, there's a million fish in the sea. You can learn from this experience. You went up to that girl. She blew you off. Don't worry about it, right? You got to try it again.
For you. She wasn't the right one,
right? It's right. Instead of like, oh, she is a represents all women and they all hate you because you are a bad person and whatever.
Or not that you're a bad person necessarily, but I think it's always they're bad and they're wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You have nothing to worry about. And it doesn't help that like the resume style serialized dating culture on both social media and also on dating apps plays a formative role in making a lot of people deeply insecure about who they are and where they are, and I think that also plays a role in this as well. I mean, things are not all right. I think when people say, "Oh no, everything's fine," like I think that's wrong. I think that's false, and I think for a very long time liberals refused to address that as well. I'm not in favor of like coddling men necessarily, and I don't do that. And a lot of people get mad at me for doing that, but I am a man myself and I've gone through these experiences as well. And I think it's important to understand where this comes from, identify it, and then explain to people that, at the end of the day, the insecure right-wing content creators are basically taking advantage of your own personal insecurities and leading you astray. They're behaving in clownish behavior. They're engaging in clownish behavior. They're lame, and you need to be cool. And I think a lot of young men respond to that. But unfortunately, as more and more of these kinds of content creators have gained prominence in a lot of these spheres, right-wing adjacent or socially conservative, and many people don't actually go, that's lame, actually, don't be like that. You lose out on positive male role models, I think.
Right.
And it creates this permission structure around that sort of behavior where people are either, at least in my experience, too afraid to speak out against it because they don't want to fall victim to harassment initiatives and stalking initiatives, which happens a lot on the internet, because these audiences are very rabid, right? Or they just keep quiet because a lot of people kind of want to maintain an inoffensive status. So a lot of people in the margins who would play the role of like a positive male role model, in many circumstances, end up choosing silence, and that only continues to expand the right-wing permission structure because those guys never shut up. There's a reason for why I'm one of the singled out people in terms of like the Joe Rogan of the left, and that there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of like right-wing manosphere content creators that you could point to.
Don't the Democrats sort of deserve some? I mean, I think you would agree with this. They deserve, or the liberals, not the Democrats, but the liberal elites. Don't they deserve some of the responsibility for? I mean, look at the Boy Scouts, right? I was never a Boy Scout, but I have friends who were Boy Scouts and they were Eagle Scouts and they sort of grew up in that world and they have friends and mentors from that world. The Boy Scouts I don't think exists anymore. It's the Scouts of America or something, right? They combined, they mashed up the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts into one thing. Where were the Democrats when that happened, saying no? Boys need their own space, just like girls need their own space, right? We don't want to put, not everything has to be commingled into this great, sort of like co-educational experiment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. I have no idea what happened there, and it's just not even an area of interest for me at all. Like, so for me, like in many circumstances, like, see what you just described, I think probably if I am going to speculate on what took place without knowing anything, I would assume that from my experience as a Boy Scout in Turkey, okay, growing up, I assume that they did some fuck, okay, and then in an effort to like cast a cloud of dispersion over whatever scrutiny that they were under, they were like, oh, we're pro-trans now, and we're doing this thing where we're woke, I promise we're woke, and then
right,
and then the right grabbed onto that, and they made that like a major culture war narrative to be like, look, they're destroying this
Boy Scouts are woke, right?
And then that dominates discourse, and sometimes it's okay to just be like, yeah, I don't know anything about that, I don't really care. But
no, I'm with you there.
It's like a normal thing that people need to do more of, because
you don't have to opine on everything, right? You don't have to have an opinion on everything,
especially as it pertains to trans issues, because trans people make up such a tiny percentage of the population, and yet their very existence kind of breaks the brains of a lot of people. America, by and large, Americans, if you look at the polls, by and large, are still pretty woke on trans stuff. If you ask them directly, do you think trans people are discriminated against? I think it's like 60% of Americans that say yes. But if you ask them, do you think trans people should be able to participate in high school athletics, like trans women specifically should participate in high school athletics, it's like 80% is like, absolutely not. How do we get here? We got here because originally the right-wing groups, after Obergefell, decided, oh, well, we can't really do the homophobia stuff as hard anymore, so we got to push this new thing. We got to push on trans people, right? And at first, in the 2016 campaign cycle, they went after bathrooms, right? They thought this would be a valid line of attack. They were like, oh, we can't let trans people, go to the bathroom that is correspondent to their current gender, right? If you're a trans woman, you can't go to the women's restroom. If you're a trans man, you can't go to the men's restroom, right? And that was an abject failure. There was a lot of pushback from corporations. There was a lot of pushback from the Democratic Party. And actually, that failed spectacularly. That failed so hard that North Carolina had to back away from that position. And Donald Trump actually was pro-trans at the time. He saw that. He read the room and he was like, I don't care where Caitlyn Jenner pees in the Trump Tower, as long as she's in the Trump Tower, right? Like he was saying he was pro-Trump. There's a photo of him kissing like a LGBT for Trump flag from 2016. That sounds like a lifetime ago, I know. But the reason why was because
Trump's a New Yorker. I mean, he's basically a queen to begin with.
I mean,
right?
Of course. He is. But that lack of social conservatism helped him, right, is what I'm trying to say. He was seen as more moderate for that reason in 2016. Now, the family council style right-wing Christian nationalist think tanks recognizes that was a major defeat. And there's a brilliant New York Times investigative reporting piece on this, actually, where they went back to the drawing board. They went back and they started focus testing. And they were like, okay, if we directly target trans people, it doesn't work because most Americans are like, I don't really care about this. Why are you just like making me worry about this? But what we found out in those focus groups, this is from the reporting, was that if they associated trans people as somehow cheating in one of the only areas where there is still some semblance of meritocracy, sports, right? That Americans do really care about. And if you associate them with children and like child predation, that is a very effective vehicle to openly attack trans people and eradicate trans existence, slowly starting on that side where you have a lot of support and then moving further and further into we must eradicate any sort of medicine that they're getting. This is less than 1% of the population. Right. I always use the argument like Donald Trump made the 49 NCAA trans athletes no longer eligible to compete in the NCAA collegiate divisions that they were in. Do you feel like that actually increased? Do you feel like that made your problems go away? Is your cost of living issue gone away? Are things more affordable now because of that? Was your landlord a transgender person? No. Why did you care about this so much? And it's because the Republicans are very good at making everybody else care about a thing that if we were to just like sit around, take a deep breath and think amongst ourselves, we'd be like, why do I care about this? I don't actually care about this. Someone made me care about this.
But are you letting? I think I agree with you on that. I guess my devil's advocate question. I don't want to get caught up on the trans stuff too much, but my devil's advocate question would be: isn't the groups, the Democratic groups, the NGOs that sort of like run the party, shouldn't they after? And this is going to be a somewhat provocative, controversial thing to say, but after the gay marriage decision of the Supreme Court, whenever that was, 2015, 10 years ago, isn't there an argument that they should have said, okay, we won, right? The gay rights movement has been, those rights are now enshrined in, the Constitution. The Supreme Court has ratified it. Let's move on. But instead, they said, well, the next issue in the equality fight is transgenderism. I mean, tell me why I'm wrong on that.
So the reason why is because there is validity to that argument. Like of course, the groups in particular that care about this sort of stuff are always going to be advocating and always going to be trying to protect whatever marginalized identity that is out there. And I always point to universality, which we briefly talked about before we started, for that reason. I'll give you a great example in this. Okay, I'm going to give you two examples on this, okay? Two people in very different parts of the country that are uncompromising about protecting trans people, right? And have done a very good job with it. One is the governor of Kentucky, Andy Bashar,
sure.
Who has time and time again been attacked by the Republicans on this trans stuff, and he's like, I don't care about this. They're our neighbors. They are also, like, I'm a Christian, and
they're God's children too.
Yeah, they're God's children too. God taught me, shut up. You need to apologize to those trans constituents that I have, as a matter of fact, instead of demanding an apology for me. Brilliant way to defend trans people. Nobody punishes him for it. Obviously, he's a dynastic name in Kentucky politics. Sure, that plays a big role here, but it works. When you just say, no, I don't care about this. Get out of here. These are just our neighbors. A lot of Americans just want to leave other people alone. As a matter of fact, a big part of the reason why many people think like trans people are weird or constantly top of mind is because of the right-wing obsession, almost sexual pathology surrounding trans existence and trans identity. I always joke, I say like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh know more about like new trans tech than trans people in my community do. They don't even know what's going on about like the latest and greatest in like trans identity, right? More than the right-wingers, the average right-wingers do. And it's like, bro, why are you so obsessed? Calm down. Now, the other successful example I will use is Zohran Mamdani. Now he's in New York City. New York City's woke and gay, right? Libtard paradise. However, Zohran Mamdani, 34 years old, brown, socialist, openly anti-Zionist, And yet, he's seemingly Teflon Don. He's seemingly Teflon Zoran.
He does have that Trump thing to him. Yeah.
Why? It's because he has discernible policies that help improve the broadest subsect of New Yorkers' lives, and everyone associates them with those policies. He's uncompromisingly pro-trans. Why does nobody ever bring up the trans stuff? Why? Because they're too busy. They're too busy.
And
they're too busy like trying to tackle the real material changes that he wants to implement. They're too busy saying, oh, no, that's terrifying. And in the process of doing so, a lot of these right-wing guys actually show their ass, where they look out of touch, elitist, and out of step with all of the problems that the average working class Americans are experiencing.
Right.
That's
why are you talking about bathrooms? I'm just trying to figure out how I can get to work. Yeah, right.
Yeah, because you can always go back to that. You can always go back to that, no matter what happens. Like, if you are uncompromisingly in favor of Medicare for all, for example, right? Let's say that's your advocacy. That's what you're pushing for, no matter what, a universal program, single-payer health care, right? You can always go back to that. And then your opposition looks silly in comparison for being like, no, healthcare for everybody. I don't care about that. What I do care about is 0.1% of the population being able to piss in whichever bathroom they want to piss in. They're weird. Why don't you talk about those guys? You look silly. You look out of touch. But because the Democrats, the National Democratic Party, is so afraid of being associated with actual radical, which I wouldn't even say these are radical, broad, sweeping reforms, but radical for the time being, adjusted to the current state of affairs in American governance. But like, if they were more invested in material changes that and weren't afraid of identifying themselves with these clear-cut policy positions that they are going to advance, no matter what it takes, most Americans wouldn't give a single shred of a about trans stuff. They wouldn't.
Right.
If you do not define yourself with policies that people can identify with, that people actually want, and you run on harm reduction narratives, you run on lesser evil narratives, you run on vote blue no matter who narratives, and you are wishy-washy on a lot of the previous policies and previous positions that you've taken, like Kamala Harris was, right, on immigration, and on healthcare as well, and on numerous
and
things.
on trans issues, where she got absolutely murdered by Trump.
Exactly. You look hypocritical. You look weak. You lose a big chunk of your base as well. You lose a big chunk of the people who at least would care about those issues, and they just go, okay, well, she's not defending me. What am I supposed to do? And worst of all, if you stand for nothing, right? If you come across as though you stand for nothing other than I'm not the Republican, then your opposition can define you as silly. So it wasn't necessarily that Kamala Harris responded to the groups, the ACLU or whatever, about like Guatemalan undocumented migrants getting bottom surgery in prisons, right? It wasn't the answer that she gave that actually tanked her chances. A lot of back and forth discourse has taken place on this. And a lot of Democrats themselves have looked at the situation and been like, oh, we got to drop this trash immediately, right? We got to drop it. That's wrong. That's stupid. You don't have to do that at all. That's not something that you are doing to win over a broad majority of the crowd.
Well, you just end up looking weak, right? You're gonna cut and run.
Not only you end up looking weak, okay? You end up looking hypocritical for all of the years that you've been associated with this thing, and the Republicans are never going to stop associating that with you anyway. And it's the same principle behind like the moniker of socialism, right? Zoran Mamdani is like, I'm a democratic socialist. Okay. They say Nancy Pelosi is a communist. Who cares? It was actually someone who I don't agree with his worldview, but I actually think is a pretty decent communicator who once famously said, his name is Pete Buttigieg, who once famously said, listen, no matter what we do, they're going to call us a socialist or a communist. So I say, push for whatever the best policy is for Americans. Now, of course, what he thinks is the best policy for Americans, I disagree with. But he's right. They're always going to call you a socialist or a communist regardless. There is no reason to from the seemingly ostensibly left flank of American politics, also destroy that, also play a role in isolating that identifier because that's only a cell phone. You're just signaling to everyone that you are bad. The identity that they are associating you with is a bad one, and that's just a losing position.
Well, conservatives have a narrative that makes sense, right? Liberals suck at building a narrative. Like, what is the Democrats' elevator pitch? I could tell you what the MAGA elevator pitch is, right? I mean, I know you're on Twitter, right? You see the White House accounts, they post these like schlocky things about like returning to the good old days when everything was perfect in America, protecting the heritage of the country. It's manipulative, but it tells a story. What the hell is the story that the Democrats are telling?
That's exactly the problem. And it's really interesting because this is something that I identified many, many years ago and have been yelling about for the past decade or so. And it's also one that I warned about both directly to the Democrats at the DNC, to the ones who would talk to me, even though they did kick me out at the last day because of my because of one of those issues that now is basically a deal breaker for a lot of people. Gaza.
You're talking last year? Oh yeah,
I went to the DNC. I saw,
right.
And you can watch my experience going from day 1 to like day 4, where I am slowly but surely losing my mind about like how out of step and how out of touch the Democrats were that were over there. They were doing, end zone dances, like they were putting up LeBron numbers. They were putting up like 30 points above Trump or something, like the way they were portraying themselves.
Well, I mean, you were one of the voices on the left who I always appreciated because you were under no illusions about how the mail vote was going to break last year from the stuff that I watched of you, right? And I always felt like I was taking crazy pills last year because I was telling, my liberal friends and my liberal New Yorker family, Trump, not only is Trump going to win, it's not going to be particularly close, and he's going to win because of this connection that he has established with young men. People were shocked when that proved to be true, which I think just shows this sort of like filter bubble that a lot of liberals still live in, where they believe that everything that happens on MSNBC is the truth, and people are going to vote because of January 6th and because they believe democracy is at stake, and not to your point about their actual material conditions.
So here's the thing: people don't care about the institutions; they hate them. And why should they? Why should they love the institutions? Because from their perspective, if you're like a 45-year-old on disability and you've been out of a job for the better part of a decade, and you literally need constant medicine that's getting more and more costly to just simply go about your regular day, you're very angry, you're very resentful, and you feel like no one is helping you, right? There are hundreds of millions of Americans that don't experience exactly what I'm talking about, but like some version of that, where they feel like this is the wealthiest country on the planet. Why the hell am I suffering? Why are my roads riddled with potholes? Why is my internet dogged? Or I don't know, why don't I have a rural hospital in a 50-mile radius? Right?
Why does it cost $30,000 to buy a used car?
Yeah, why is everything so expensive? Why is food getting more expensive? Like, when all of that stuff is combined, and also, most importantly, something that we're not even talking about, rent. Why is rent so goddamn unaffordable? Why is it too damn high? When you factor all of that stuff in, and you have all these resentments, you have all of these like understandable resentments, and you got one party that's saying, yeah, actually, it's because of the pussy Democrats, because they only care about like trans stuff and nothing else. You're going to be like, okay, I want a mallet to go through these institutions. I don't even care. Okay? And that's what they did. That's the bargain. That was the bargain for Trump. Right. That was what, like, a lot of Democrats didn't understand that the saving democracy narratives were not going to work. Right. Because nobody cares. People just want change. And they were willing to take that gamble once again. And I said at the time, who is more willing to take that gamble? Young people who were too young to remember what it was like when Trump was president the first time. That's why I said a lot of the low propensity voters would be swinging to Trump, and that would cause him to win the popular vote. And I was right. And I said that directly to the Pod Johns ahead of time before the election. I said that to Newsweek as well, where I said even if Donald Trump loses, he will have dramatically reshaped American politics in his favor. And basically, that is what happened. And then we did the autopsies after the election where people came and they were like, okay, you were right about a lot of this stuff. What's going on? What's your point? And I kept repeating over and over again, Democrats need to sincerely drop the whole, like, we got to have the good billionaires on our side and focus on kitchen table issues and not in some wishy-washy, focus-tested way where you're promoting means-tested solutions, but like universality where everyone gets it and you have to be unafraid and uncompromising and win back trust amongst the workers, amongst the working class Americans. And people basically just didn't hear that. They just went along with whatever narratives. They were like, oh, no, you mean we just focused on trans stuff too much. We defended trans people too hard. That's probably what it was, I think. Or we were too pro-immigration. That's the one that really frustrates me. It's one of the issues that I obviously have advocated for quite a bit. And it's one that was like so alarming. It was one that was so frustrating for me because Americans, by and large, understand that this is a nation of migrants. Okay, we have had a mean streak, a fascist streak, a white nativist streak in this country for sure. White supremacy is a fundamental value for America. I mean, our founders were slavers. Let's be real, right? Having said that, diversity is also a fundamental value of American history, and immigration is what has made America one of the greatest countries on the planet throughout history. And that diversity, the anti-diversity narratives are inherently un-American. And yet, Democrats totally dropped the ball on this. They were so afraid. They saw one poll that said 60% of Americans want mass deportation, and they got terrified. And they were like, oh, we have to be the mass deportation party, not the Republicans. October 5th, Joe Biden unveiled his policy for immigration. It was October 5th, 2023. I remember it very clearly, 2 days before October 7th. He came out and he said, we got an Oklahoma senator to write a bill for us that is a bipartisan bill. It wasn't a bipartisan bill. It was a right-wing bill. It was Donald Trump's exact verbatim 2020 anti-immigrant agenda, all the way down to funding ICE and building the border wall.
You're saying
right?
why? What's the point of cosplaying as Republicans? Because like you're never going to beat them. They're the real deal. Are you familiar with this guy Graham Plattner in Maine?
Yes, very familiar.
If you're going to make a litmus test for candidates running for office, that like there can be no in their past, who's going to run for office in this day and age? How many times have you been canceled?
A million times, but also look at the New York City mayoral debate. He said, why won't you condemn Hasan Piker? Why won't you condemn Hamas? My face being plastered on mailers that are being distributed all over New York. And it says, Google Hasan Piker 9/11.
I'm not a big Zoran guy. I think I'm not going to even vote in this election. But
you got to vote for Zoran, man. You got to do it.
I was going to vote for Sliwa just because he cracks me up.
That's
no, I'm not
crazy.
actually.